Alright, what's up YouTube friends? How you guys doing today? So, in my studies, I come across a verse that mentions clothing, right? And I figured this is a really good example to use to show how these physical things in the Bible, like clothing, are not meant to be interpreted physically, right? That's just one way to do it. So, we're going to talk about it. This will only take a minute. So this is interesting, in my opinion. I find all kinds of shit interesting that most people think is boring. I feel like you're probably the same way. We have in the Bible many examples of clothing of all sorts, right? From the sackcloth with, the two witnesses, to a luxurious coat of bright and beautiful with many colors, right? So we're going to see what this is. The Bible proves the Bible. So here's a bunch of verses that all say the same thing. They all have one thing in common. Jacob tore his clothes off, put sackcloth around his waist, and mourned for his son for many days. That was Genesis 37:34. 2 Samuel 3:31. Then David ordered Joab and all the people with him, tear your clothes off, put on sackcloth, and mourn before Abner. And King David himself walked behind the funeral bier. 2 Kings 19:1. On hearing this report, King Hezekiah tore off his clothes, put on sackcloth, and entered the house of the Lord. This one is special, okay? Because blessed are the poor in spirit, for they shall be consoled. The kingdom is theirs. He entered the house of the Lord. This is the best example, for right now. Nehemiah 9:1. On the 24th day of the same month, the Israelites gathered together, fasting and wearing sackcloth with dust on their heads. Now, if you read this, right, and you think they picked up dirt and threw it in their face, you're missing it. You're missing the point. Dust on their head, right? It means they were mentally exhausted, right? They were tired and they hadn't had rest mentally. It means they were beat down, right? Dust. Esther chapter 4 verse 1. When Mordecai learned of all that had happened, he tore his clothes, put on sackcloth and ashes, and went out to the middle of the city, wailing loudly and bitterly. Now, what do all these verses have in common? They all happen before someone grieves, right? Crying or being super sad. You know what I mean? So, clothes, in this biblical sense here, are like what you tell yourself to keep going, right? They're feelings that you hold on to stay strong, right? And that's a good way to put it. It's the things you tell yourself so you can keep moving forward and stay happy, right? And when that's the clothes, and when you tear it off, you mourn. Make sense? They're clothing that the mind wraps itself in so it isn't in despair. With these clothes, when they are torn off, your feelings are exposed and you lament, you wail, right? So, this helps us to understand an early story that I mentioned in the beginning, the coat of many colors. It was bright and it was beautiful and it had many colors, right? And if we understand what clothing is, what's that tell you about the clothes that the coat that Joseph had? Joseph was a happy camper, so to speak. And as the kids these days would say, he had haters, right? I don't know how it is for you, but the people that I'm closest to are the ones who hate me the most. They will break their foot trying to kick me while I'm down. Like, seriously. If something happens and then I'm sad or something, upsets me and they find out about it, they act like they have no idea and then try to push my fucking buttons. You know what I mean? Anybody else go through that? Misery loves company. That's the point. So, let's look at the coat of many colors that Joseph had, right? And remember, we're not really going to look at it. And just keep in mind, this coat came from Jacob, right? Jacob who wrestled with God. It's really short look at. We all know how this went, right? Joseph had a coat of many colors from his father, and it was beautiful and all that. But he also had a bunch of relatives who were in rags mentally, right? They weren't happy. They were miserable. They wanted everybody else to be miserable. They were spiteful. If you read the story, if you read this chapter, you'll see that there was a lot of anger and hostility in these relatives. But Joseph, he had the coat of many colors. It was beautiful, creative, happy mind, right? He didn't let shit bring him down. And then, what did they do about it? What did these bitter ass people do to the man who was happy? They threw his ass down a well, right? And this here is also symbolic. What is a well? Water, right? I've said this a few times. When you see water in art, it's the mind. Like the waters below and the waters above. The mind below, the carnal ego mind that is enmity against God, and then there's the higher mind above. But so the water represents the mind. The well, right? This is pretty simple. The well is a place where water is, right? But it's really low. It's under the ground. It's in the earth. So that's symbolic, right? So when they destroyed his coat, they destroyed his happiness, and they threw him in the well, right? Make sense now? It's kind of easy. We see that his happiness was taken, right? They took his coat, his mental clothing, which also Paul speaks on quite a few times. Do your best to appear clothed before the Lord. Anyway, his happiness was taken and he was left in a low place. Just figured I'd share this with everybody because I just came across it. It's an easy example of how the Bible works using poetic devices. But that's it, guys. Peace out. Love you all.